COP23 is a Conference of Parties meeting, which means national governments come together at a UN. It's to represent the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. There's 197 member countries that are party to that convention. And essentially for the last many years, countries have been negotiating on a global agreement around climate change that binds each country, developing and developed country, to some form of commitment around climate change. All countries agreed to signing something called the Paris Agreement, which bound them in terms of their own nationally determined contributions. So a country that has more difficult developing country status and more difficulty with moving its energy agenda towards renewables, for example, would make certain commitments, and then other countries that have more progressive technology or more options on financing would bind themselves through other commitments. And what happens is that the Paris Agreement looks cumulatively at these various contributions and essentially tries to create a global agreement that prevents temperature rise beyond a particular level that's detrimental to the Earth and humans on the Earth. So from 2015, with the signing of the Paris Agreement, countries have ratified the agreement, and now we are in the process of negotiating the details around the implementation of the agreement. So there's a lot of technical discussions that need to take place around those modalities of what implementation looks like. And when we say there's various themes that will be discussed, so everything from reducing carbon emissions to looking at adaptation issues, impacts around climate change, technology, finance, compliance, global stock takes. Anyway, there's a whole pile of technical things that will be discussed, but this is a really important meeting in terms of clarifying all of those modalities around implementation. And what happens is that this is a really important milestone because 2018, so the next COP, is when everything has to be finalized and implementation will start in 2020. In June, Trump announced that the US would be withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, which obviously came as a disappointment to everybody who has put a lot of effort into reaching this point. One of the difficulties is that the United States is a large contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, it's after China, it's the second largest in the world, which is a difficult position to be in, given the Paris Agreement is a global agreement around climate change and commitments to climate change. But what we have seen since the US announcement of its withdrawal is we've seen other countries, especially key developing countries, the likes of China and India, stepping forward and making commitments, renewed commitments to the Paris Agreement and renewed commitments to their own national targets, which has been really progressive. We've also seen states within the United States, the likes of Washington, New York, California, their governors and mayors coming forward to say, irrelevant of the US presidential decision, they are going to implement the targets anywhere. So it's been a really interesting time to see the coming up of all these new actors, new catalysts for climate change, particularly non-state actors. So the role of business has also become very prominent, and they're now key to the discussions, which is very different. So Fiji is obviously an island state in the Pacific Ocean, and it's the first time that a small island developing country will be the chair of COP. So with that comes obviously an influence of its national agenda through some of the chairing modalities. Fiji is a voice for the most vulnerable, least developed economies and small island developing countries. So it's going to definitely be pushing something called loss and damage to the impacts of climate change. And there was a mechanism that was agreed to, and essentially we need more progress on that mechanism on loss and damage specifically. So you'll see all of those countries pushing for finalization of that agenda, and then finance related to supporting that agenda. And then Fiji obviously sits within an ocean environment, and that in itself comes with particular concerns, and the role of oceans at regulating climate change is very prominent on the agenda at the moment, and there's lots of discussions around marine pollution, acidification of the ocean, and other really important topics related to the ocean.